Welcome to History Explained, where we illuminate the past to better understand our present. I'm your guide to your daily journey through the past to empower the future. Today is Wednesday, June 18, 2025. As we do every Wednesday, we're exploring a major global event that shaped the course of world history. Today, we turn our attention to the Berlin Airlift, one of the most remarkable humanitarian and political operations of the early Cold War. From June 1948 to May 1949, Western Allied forces conducted a massive air supply operation to sustain the population of West Berlin after the Soviet Union blockaded all land and water routes to the city. This extraordinary effort not only saved Berlin from starvation but also marked a crucial turning point in Cold War relations. What makes the Berlin Airlift particularly fascinating is how it demonstrated that the Western Allies were prepared to take significant risks to defend their principles without resorting to military confrontation. The operation combined logistical brilliance, technological innovation, and remarkable international cooperation to overcome seemingly impossible odds. So let's explore this pivotal Cold War crisis, examining the origins of the Berlin blockade, the massive logistical challenge of supplying a city by air, the human stories behind the operation, and its lasting impact on German-Allied relations and the broader Cold War struggle. To understand the Berlin Airlift, we must first examine the unique situation of Berlin in the aftermath of World War II. Following Germany's defeat in May 1945, the country was divided into four occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, despite being located deep within the Soviet zone, was similarly divided among the four Allied powers. This arrangement created a geopolitical anomaly. West Berlin, controlled by the Western Allies, was an isolated enclave surrounded by Soviet-controlled territory. Access to the city was guaranteed by agreements allowing the Western powers to use specific rail, road, and air corridors through the Soviet zone. However, these agreements were often vague and would become sources of tension as relations between the former Allies deteriorated. By 1948, cooperation between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union had largely collapsed. Disagreements over the future of Germany, the implementation of democratic reforms, and the broader direction of post-war Europe had created deep mistrust. The Western powers sought to rebuild Germany as a democratic, economically viable nation integrated into Western Europe, while the Soviet Union wanted to keep Germany weak and establish communist governments throughout Eastern Europe. The immediate trigger for the Berlin crisis came with currency reform. On June 20, 1948, the Western Allies introduced a new currency, the Deutsche Mark, in their zones of Germany, including West Berlin. This reform was designed to combat inflation and stabilize the economy, but it also represented a significant step toward the economic integration of Western Germany. Stalin viewed the currency reform as a violation of wartime agreements and a threat to Soviet interests in Germany. On June 24, 1948, Soviet forces began blocking all rail, road, and canal traffic between West Berlin and the western zones of Germany. The blockade was comprehensive, cutting off not only passenger and freight traffic but also the supply of electricity from Soviet-controlled power plants. The Soviet goal was clear: to force the Western Allies out of Berlin by making the city uninhabitable. Stalin calculated that the Western powers would not risk war over Berlin and would eventually abandon the city, giving the Soviet Union complete control over this strategically important location. The blockade created an immediate crisis for West Berlin's 2.1 million residents. The city required approximately 4,500 tons of supplies daily to survive, including food, coal for heating and electricity, medical supplies, and raw materials for industry. With surface transportation cut off, the only remaining option was air transport through the agreed-upon air corridors. General Lucius Clay, the American military governor in Germany, was determined not to abandon Berlin. Along with his British counterpart, he proposed supplying the city entirely by air. Many officials in Washington and London were skeptical that such an operation could succeed. The largest previous airlift had supplied fewer than 1,000 tons per day, far short of Berlin's needs. However, Clay and British Air Commodore Reginald Waite believed it was possible with sufficient aircraft and careful organization. On June 26, 1948, the first Allied cargo flights landed at Tempelhof Airport in the American sector of Berlin, marking the beginning of what would become known as Operation Vittles by the Americans and Operation Plainfare by the British. The early days of the airlift were chaotic and improvised. Aircraft of various types landed at Berlin's airports around the clock, creating dangerous congestion and confusion. It quickly became clear that success would require unprecedented levels of coordination and efficiency. The man who transformed the Berlin Airlift from a desperate improvisation into a precision operation was Lieutenant General William Tunner, who arrived in Berlin in July 1948. Tunner was a logistics expert who had previously organized the airlift over the hump from India to China during World War II. He brought systematic management principles to the Berlin operation that dramatically increased its effectiveness. Tunner established strict scheduling procedures, standardized aircraft loading and unloading processes, and created a conveyor belt system of continuous flights. Aircraft took off from bases in Western Germany every few minutes, followed precise flight paths and altitudes, and landed in Berlin according to rigid timetables. Any plane that missed its landing slot was required to return to base rather than circle the airport, preventing dangerous congestion. The airlift employed three main airports in Berlin: Tempelhof in the American sector, Gatow in the British sector, and later Tegel in the French sector. Each airport was assigned specific types of cargo and aircraft to maximize efficiency. A fourth airport, Schönefeld, remained under Soviet control and was not available to the Western Allies. The variety of aircraft used in the airlift was remarkable. American C-47 Skytrains and C-54 Skymasters formed the backbone of the operation, supplemented by British Avro Yorks, Handley Page Hastings, and short Sunderland flying boats that landed on Berlin's lakes. Civilian aircraft were also pressed into service, with crews from various airlines volunteering for this dangerous mission. Loading and unloading procedures were streamlined to minimize ground time. German workers, many of them former Luftwaffe personnel, worked alongside Allied crews to achieve loading times that would have been considered impossible before the crisis. Coal, the heaviest and most critical cargo, was loaded in pre-weighed bags to speed the process. Weather presented one of the greatest challenges to the operation. Berlin's winter of 1948-49 was particularly harsh, with frequent fog, ice, and snow making flying extremely dangerous. Soviet authorities refused to allow the installation of improved navigation equipment in their zone, forcing Allied pilots to rely on basic instruments and visual navigation in often impossible conditions. Despite these challenges, the airlift's efficiency steadily improved. By autumn 1948, daily deliveries regularly exceeded 4,500 tons, meeting Berlin's minimum requirements. The operation's peak day came on April 16, 1949, when 1,398 flights delivered 12,941 tons of supplies in a 24-hour period, demonstrating that the airlift could exceed even optimistic projections. The human dimension of the Berlin airlift was as remarkable as its logistical achievements. Allied aircrew flew in dangerous conditions, often making 3 or 4 round trips per day. Many pilots and crew members were volunteers who had already completed their military service but returned to duty for this mission. 31 American airmen and 39 British aircrew lost their lives during the operation. The response of Berlin's civilian population was equally impressive. Despite shortages of food, fuel, and electricity, Berliners demonstrated remarkable resilience and determination. They organized themselves to unload aircraft, clear snow from runways, and maintain essential services. The sight of Allied aircraft overhead became a symbol of hope and Western commitment to their freedom. One of the most touching aspects of the airlift was the Candy Bomber operation initiated by American pilot Gail Halvorsen. Beginning with small parachutes made from handkerchiefs dropping candy to children near Tempelhof Airport, this gesture grew into a systematic effort that delivered tons of candy and gum to Berlin's children. The operation became a powerful symbol of American goodwill and helped build positive relationships between occupying forces and German civilians. The Soviet response to the airlift was initially dismissive, then increasingly hostile as the operation's success became apparent. Soviet fighters began buzzing Allied aircraft, flying dangerously close to cargo planes in attempts to intimidate pilots. Soviet searchlights illuminated Allied aircraft at night, and radio jamming interfered with navigation. However, Stalin was careful to avoid direct military confrontation. Soviet forces never actually attacked Allied aircraft, recognizing that such action could trigger a larger war. Instead, they relied on harassment and propaganda, confident that the logistical challenges would eventually force the Western Allies to abandon the airlift. As winter gave way to spring in 1949, it became clear that the airlift was not only succeeding but was actually strengthening West Berlin's ties to the West. The operation had demonstrated Western commitment in the most dramatic way possible, while the Soviet blockade had generated international sympathy for Berlin and criticism of Soviet tactics. By early 1949, Stalin was looking for a face-saving way to end the crisis. Secret negotiations began through diplomatic channels, and on May 4, 1949, the four Allied powers announced that the blockade would be lifted on May 12, 1949. However, the airlift continued until September 30, 1949, to build up reserves and demonstrate that the Western Allies would not be caught unprepared again. The statistics of the Berlin airlift are staggering. Over 15 months, Allied aircraft made 278,228 flights, carrying 2.3 million tons of supplies. American aircraft accounted for about 1.8 million tons, while British aircraft carried approximately 500,000 tons. The operation cost the United States about $350 million and Britain approximately $17 million, enormous sums for the time. The Berlin airlift had profound and lasting consequences for the Cold War and German-Allied relations. Most immediately, it demonstrated that the Western Allies were prepared to make significant sacrifices to defend their positions without resorting to military force. This established an important precedent for Cold War confrontations, showing that conflicts could be resolved through determination and logistical capability rather than violence. For Germany, the airlift marked a crucial turning point in relations with the Western Allies. The sight of former enemies risking their lives to supply German civilians helped overcome lingering hostilities from World War II. Many historians consider the airlift the beginning of the transformation of West Germany from occupied territory to valued ally. The crisis also accelerated the formal division of Germany. In May 1949, just as the blockade was ending, the Federal Republic of Germany was established in the Western zones. The German Democratic Republic followed in the Soviet zone in October 1949. Berlin remained divided, with the city becoming a symbol of Cold War tensions for the next 4 decades. The success of the airlift strengthened the newly formed NATO alliance and demonstrated the effectiveness of transatlantic cooperation. The operation required unprecedented coordination between American and British forces, establishing patterns of cooperation that would characterize the Western Alliance throughout the Cold War. Technologically, the Berlin airlift drove innovations in air traffic control, aircraft maintenance, and cargo handling that influenced commercial aviation for decades. The precision scheduling and ground handling procedures developed during the crisis became standard practices in the airline industry. The airlift also established important principles about the role of air power in international relations. It demonstrated that sustained air operations could achieve strategic objectives without the massive destruction associated with military campaigns. This lesson would influence American thinking about air power throughout the Cold War and beyond. Perhaps most importantly, the Berlin airlift became a powerful symbol of Western values and determination. The image of Allied aircraft bringing food and fuel to besieged civilians provided a stark contrast to Soviet policies that seemed to prioritize political control over human welfare. This symbolic victory was as important as the practical success of keeping Berlin supplied. The Berlin airlift stands as one of the most successful humanitarian and political operations in modern history. It saved a city from starvation, demonstrated the potential of international cooperation, and established crucial precedents for Cold War competition. The operation showed that conflicts between superpowers need not inevitably lead to military confrontation and that determined, well-organized efforts could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The airlift also illustrates the importance of leadership and organization in crisis situations. The transformation from chaotic improvisation to precision operation under General Tunner's direction shows how proper management can multiply the effectiveness of available resources. As we reflect on this remarkable episode, we can appreciate how the Berlin airlift embodied the best aspects of international cooperation while addressing one of the most dangerous crises of the early Cold War. The courage of aircrew who flew in dangerous conditions, the resilience of Berlin's civilians, and the determination of political leaders on both sides of the Atlantic combined to achieve what many thought impossible. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of the Berlin airlift. Tomorrow, we'll be back with our cultural insights, episode where we'll be examining the tradition of storytelling in African cultures and its profound influence on literature, oral history, and cultural preservation worldwide. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What aspects of the Berlin Airlift do you find most remarkable or relevant to contemporary international relations? Let us know in the comments section below. For our members, this Sunday we'll have special content exploring other Cold War crises and how they were resolved through diplomacy, demonstrating patterns of conflict and cooperation that shaped the latter half of the 20th century. Until next time, I'm your guide for History Explained, where we believe that understanding yesterday is the key to navigating tomorrow.